following show may shock, disturb, and offend some viewers. The opinions, theories, and facts shared on this podcast are not widely accepted by the brainwashed masses, especially those who find dark humor offensive. Viewer discretion is advised.
Jeffrey Dahmer soaked in blood. The Unabomber blowing up. Waco, Texas, and Heaven's Gates. Aliens modified, meant from apes. JFK shot in the head by the CIA. Bigfoot and the Mothman. Son of Sam talking to dogs again. Witches, ghosts, and goblins. Mysterious noise and hauntings. Dark arts and the skull and bones. Most celebrities are probably cloned. So if you're feeling all alone, crack a beer and get stoned. I welcome you to the podcast Strange Brew. We're here to entertain you. We're here to entertain you.
It's about to get strange.
We begin tonight with the horrific discovery at the former Kamloops Indian Residential School in British Columbia.
They would shave our heads and beat the hell out of you.
These are crime scenes.
The residential schools was a genocide of our people.
215 children were found in unmarked graves.
Because of your white privilege, you can't take our truth.
The federal government is ready to dispense
$10 million,
$8 million, $27 million to find unidentified burial sites.
We will follow the evidence. We will follow the science. We are here for truth-telling.
Neo-tribal elites are pretending that it's been found that there's 215 children.
There's a difference between murders and children dying in the building.
There's no list of names of missing children at any of these schools.
That's been my battle for 4 years. There wasn't murder. There wasn't genocide.
Why do you think they are holding to this mass grave story?
There have been all kinds of political gains as a result of this story.
This week, the Senate passed Bill C-15, aimed at aligning Canadian law with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People.
That law was a surrender of the province.
They have a right to the land. They own it. All of it. So is that what we're saying?
Could someone be benefiting from land being handed away willy-nilly?
They're worried about property rights and how it could possibly affect them with the DRPA legislation.
You're not getting the truth.
It feels like there is an incredible desire to keep this down.
The reaction from those with various kinds of interests will be fierce.
This member's incoherent and consistently racist posturing in this House against Indigenous and First Nations.
Denialism is hate.
Is there an end? Are we ever done reconciling?
Why haven't you dug in the ground yet with the millions of dollars you receive?
All these millions that are the revenue that are going through my band.
It's not empowering Aboriginal people at all.
Because we have no idea where all this money is going.
The journey of reconciliation is a long one, but it is a journey we are on.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. Welcome back. I'm Tomcat, a.k.a. Tom Thompson, your illustrious host, and tonight we'll be tearing into one of the most weaponized stories in Canadian history, the residential schools. For decades, we've been fed the same script: genocide, mass graves, secret murder of children. But when you dig into the records, the archives, the real history, it paints a very different picture. And we'll also be shedding and shining some light on some other mainstream topics that people don't really want to talk about. This isn't about being comfortable. This is about telling the truth objectively, especially our history, and people deserve the truth and not to be fed a lot of these cultural Marxist talking points that fuel division and lies. So welcome to the show. I want you to introduce yourself, sir, to all the audience. Tell everyone a little bit about yourself, and then we'll kind of get into your story.
Well, thank you very much, Tom. My story is kind of an interesting one, but just first of all, I just say that I was a longtime teacher, principal for a little while, worked in as a college lecturer. I did graduate work at the University of Toronto, got a PhD, piled higher and deeper on the subject of among other things, Indigenous education. We used to be called Indian Education Policy in the 80s. So I know what I'm talking about, and yet nobody else thinks so. And they got rid of me in the school system, and I'll likely never get back in. Nobody will hire me again. because I'm saying something that's just pretty obvious, that as you pointing it out on the screen, it's just one big hoax. And it's not just what's not buried in Kamloops. Is the whole image of residential schools, of Canada, of what they're saying about our history, what they're saying about Christian missionaries and explorers and settlers, builders, that the men and women who formed Canada are now being portrayed, defamed. The dead are being defamed as murderers of Indigenous children. I think, I think that you couldn't come up with a worse, defamation.
Yeah, and it's quite clear that this is being used for an agenda. And, at one point in my life, I probably kind of fell for it too. But especially within the last recent years, I've always been aware of some of the stuff that the government tries to pull. But it's clearly a plan. And because I started studying communism and like cultural Marxism and stuff, it started to show, they've done this before. They've done this in other nations, essentially trying to demonize the people who built it, because if people don't have an identity, then they can tear it all down. Like what I always kind of point to is like, if the kids, especially the youth, they did this during the Bolshevik Revolution. If you brainwash them to hate their ancestors or to think of them as villains, then when their country is being torn apart, they won't care because they think that it's built on genocide or whatever other buzzwords they like to use, and then it strips them of their heritage, and they'll actually help facilitate their own kind of destruction. So let's just get into it. We're told mass graves of hundreds of children were found at Camp Loops in May 2021. Ground-penetrating radar surveys at the former Camp Loops Indian Residential School showed soil anomalies, disturbances in the underground, and the headlines scream that 215 children found in mass graves. But if you go beyond the headlines, no human remains were found. There were nothing, not even a single skeleton, not a single skull. And they did scans, and there's not a mass grave. These are anomalies, and there's no evidence of human remains. Years later, no forensic proof. No excavations revealing bodies, yet churches were burned, people were vilified, and Canada was told to collectively hang its head in shame. And we'll get into this stuff because I want to hear your opinion, but essentially the mortality, as far as I looked into, of the residential school was driven by disease epidemics, much like every other place. Tuberculosis, smallpox, influenza, diseases ravaging all communities in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Government documents show that in many years, the mortality rate of these schools were equal to or even lower than mortality rates among Indigenous children living in homes in their communities at the time. So I want you to kind of get into maybe where all this started.
Yeah, well, again, it's just absolutely delightful to be able to tell my story. And I think it's an interesting story, in part because I'm the son of a politician who involved in bringing patriating our Constitution, included the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. He was Chief Justice of Ontario. He was Attorney General. He had an interesting career. And so I learned from him. And one thing that I never heard before was that Canada was this racist hellhole. And that's how it was being presented, almost 5 years ago, where I was teaching in Abbotsford, British Columbia, but it was all across the country. Another interesting thing about me is that when I did my graduate work in history of philosophy of education, that I did it under Mark Carney, our Prime Minister's father, Robert Carney was considered the leading expert on these, again, Indian residential schools, as they're called. And he was an incredible man. And everything that I've ever said certainly is within the tradition, within the legacy that he established as of trying to help Indigenous kids. And so what you have is this incredible deformation. You have the people who did the most for Indigenous children, Native children back in time are the ones that are being called mass murderers, serial killers, nuns with guns, murdering ministers. These are the ones that did the most. It's not as though our elite in Canada are wrong. And it's not as that they're stupid either, because they're playing with us. They darn well know. They said 3 years ago, October 27, 2022, that Canada, through its residential schools, committed a genocide. Well, nobody believes that. And then they started using different words, as they do with language. Oh, well, what we really meant was cultural genocide. But the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which went from, right up into 2015, it referred also to physical and biological genocide. So it's as though the elite for a couple of decades now have connived right now into saying we're going to, so we look better. So because we're going to be doing something about it. And of course they don't do anything, they make it worse. They keep Indigenous people thinking that the thing to do is to live in the past, to decolonize, to live in a teepee and, start a fire by rubbing sticks. It's just the most absurd thing. And what they should be doing is they should be helping Indigenous youth get away from, the ills of their own communities, these communist enclaves where there's problems with alcohol and drugs. My own 19-year-old nephew, a couple of years ago, he had been schooled on a reserve, and he had a lot of friends who are Indigenous, and one of them gave him fentanyl and killed him.
Wow, I'm sorry.
So there's real life problems on these reserves. And so what do? We don't do anything to help these people. What we do is we pretend that all the people in Canada that were helping them in the past are terrible. And then all the politicians that come in recent years are knights in shining armor, and they can slag all of us and slag my parents and my grandparents, and including my great uncles and great great grandfathers who worked as missionaries in Canada, and think they're doing something virtuous. That's the whole thing about the woke, about these DEI lunatics, is that they have people believing that they're actually doing something of value for the country, for other people, when all they're doing is just trying to promote themselves to a greater extent, and hopefully we won't notice how much they're paying themselves and all the goods they have.
Well, they're the second highest paid politicians. And I just want to know your thoughts, because what do you think of Mark Carney? Because I think he's 100% a globalist communist, right? Like, in my eyes of what he's pushing, a lot of people were sold that he's like this nice guy that cares for Canada, when he is definitely in the pockets of WEF agents that are infiltrated our governments and stuff like that.
I don't think he knows. I don't think he gives a darn about Canada.
Yeah.
I don't think he cares at all about Northern Canada. I don't think he knows what a regular Canadian is. But I don't think, a lot of the politicians in recent years really have any understanding.
They can't even define what a Canadian is. They can't tell you what a Canadian is.
No. Well, we saw it particularly during the trucker convoy.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was just, 2 days ago that they're finding out that they're giving more house arrest and curfew to Chris Barber and to Mara Leach. And there was no event in Canadian history during my lifetime, and I'm 66 and a half, so I know what I'm talking about. There was no other event, not even winning the hockey matches against the Russian in 1972. There is nothing in our history for a long time, folks, that matches the national pride of communities all across Canada, of carrying the flag and getting out and uniting and getting on top of cars. And it was in support of truckers. And then they ended up having this big trucker convoy go all the way to Ottawa in the dead of winter. And it was the most incredible thing. People like Carney and Trudeau, they had no understanding. This is the everyday Canadian. Don't take away the things that we fought hard for. You said before we began, you taking this thing, you talked about, Canada, bit of a rough place. People worked hard to build it up or whatever. Oh my gosh. We don't really know, Tom, what it was like, because I have some sense because it used to be colder in Canada, and I lived in the north a little bit, so I know, but we really don't have any idea what it was like 200 years ago.
My family, I've traced one of my grandmas back, her bloodline to 1604 in Canada.
Oh, but you're not indigenous. You know why? Because you're European. Europeans the only ones that aren't indigenous anywhere. According to the World Economic Forum and all these globalist nutcases, they this idea that white people can't ever be native to anything.
Yeah, that's my co-host is from Ireland, and they're doing it to Ireland too. It's not good.
Yeah. So I have the last name McMurtry, and I'm hoping maybe some people that are following this will check me out on X, because I'm I'm doing the work that you guys are doing. I'm going up against the taboos, against the the open lies, against the manipulation of children. They're doing this mostly in schools. You talk to a group of Canadians and say, you don't own the land you're living on, you might get hit over the head with a shovel or a hockey stick. So they don't go after your regular guys like me and you and say this nonsense, because they know they're going to get some opposition.
Mm-hmm.
So they go after kids in schools and they say the most awful things. And I could just mention 6 things really quickly. They go after, and the last thing I'm going to talk about is the indigenous thing, and then just mention my story very quickly. So they go after all the gender. Oh, little 8-year-old, you're in the wrong body. Have you ever thought of mutilating and yourself and sterilizing, never having kids? So number one is the whole gender trans. We need to know your sexuality through your pronoun. We need to creep into everything about you as you go through the confusing sexual years of a teenager. The second thing is with race. Oh, your color, your skin color is going to affect your future. And if you look like me, you're a monster. And if you look a darker shade, then, you're going to be a victim forever. And just to fill their kids' heads up with the idea that their birth characteristics are going to determine everything. The next thing is they're taking away all academic values in schools. They're doing things like equity marking and removing the challenge and the fairness of it all and the equality. It used to be equality of opportunity. Now it's no, we're communists. We have to, Chinese kids are doing really well. Don't do anything for them. Just bring up the kids who aren't working as hard. But you can't do that. If you have X number of scholarships to give in a year, then if you're going to give more to the less deserving groups, then you're taking away from the more deserving groups or kids. And so that's 3 things. The fourth thing is getting rid of all sorts of good books, like literature.
I collect a lot of books.
I love, like Kill Mockingbird, whatever. Yeah. Because, this word might hurt or this, whatever. Or, oh my gosh, this one group isn't portrayed, like they lived in an Eden, whatever. And but they're denying kids the right to read the best of what has been written and said, and to enjoy that transportation into other people's worlds and imaginations. Another one is they're completely, the fifth one is they're going against history. They're telling us all these lies about history. Oh, we did this to the Chinese, we did this to the Indo-Canadians, we did this to the Jews, we did this to the indigenous, we did this to the blacks, we did this to go on and on and on, to women and the Doukhobors, all these groups we were just horrible with. And you go, hold on a second, it's the opposite. When you look at groups in Canada, where would they have been better received than here? And so the last one, and I could go on for a long time, but the last one of the 6 that I wanted to mention to you was about indigenous. And that is, you got daily land acknowledgements in many schools. You have kids all wearing orange. Of course, they have to wear thousands of different colors, it seems, depending on what propaganda, the principal or the school board, decides to work through the school system that day. And but the indigenous thing is very upsetting because it's going after people's basic rights. It's going after people's property. And we've got a premier in British Columbia who's on the outer edge of this. I'd be really interested. He should do some sort of lobotomy on him after he perishes one day, because I just don't know what would make his brain think it's a good idea to give away huge chunks of British Columbia, like Haida Gwaii and parts of Richmond and parts of the Seashell or Sunshine Coast and on and on and on. You're doing this without regard for the people who pay the taxes. You're giving away huge chunks of property and the right to make decisions to people who aren't paying taxes, who are getting free this, free everything. Oh, it's not that much that they're getting. Oh my gosh. You know how much I paid for my 3 kids University of Education. All three of my kids went to university for a total of 24 years. Do you know how much money that cost me? And others are getting it free because they have, their ancestors had a speck of this or whatever. And then, so to me, it's very upsetting when you start taking Canadians and say, well, this group based on ancestry or whatever has more rights than the next group. So I see in you behind you got the Great White North. I'm very proud of the fact of European built country and so forth. I'm proud of the fact that it's tough land, a lot of snow in the winter. I'm proud of the whole mystique about Canada's vast land. And if people who are coming here from Zimbabwe and they're being treated badly because of their skin color, I would say that's not the Canada I know. And we're going to do everything we can to give them the same opportunity to be successful. That's the Canada. Now what they're doing, they're taking all the people who are white European like me, and they're firing them if they dare question all this incredible dystopian ideology, religion that's coming in. So all I said one day in class 4.5 years ago was the kids that died in residential school. And there's some that died, as you already mentioned, those that died did so from disease, some cases, accidents, fires. Because the kids were talking about, oh my gosh, there was, babies and being, produced after the priests were raping the girls, and then they would put the babies in incinerators or hang them on hooks or drown them. And you had just all these stories. And it's hard when you know Canada and you say to the kids, well, again, it was my understanding those that died tragically while enrolled in residential school did so from disease. I was walked out of the building, and I'll never teach again. So we have a very serious problem. You're jailing Tamara Leach. She had 4 days in solitary confinement, 2 nights, I believe, sleeping on a concrete floor. You're taking the heroes that stand up for the rights of ordinary Canadians like truck drivers and putting them in jail.
They did that to Jeremy McKenzie. Like, that's crazy. He was a veteran of Canada. Like, you can't, he fought in wars for perceived freedom and realized they were all being lied to. I just, it's something, I'm not going to teach my kids this stuff. Like, I'm going to make sure, that they're proud of their heritage. And a lot of people want to bring up all these talking points that they actually have never looked into or read books about. Even the idea there was a genocide in North America. 95% of the native population died because of disease. And the funny thing that a lot of people don't want to point out is, where would they be without white Europeans, essentially? They'd be living essentially in the Stone Age. And it's not like negating that, maybe their way of life was good in some aspects and there were some aspects that were negative. But they were, by definition, colonizing each other. There was tribes like the Iroquois that would take over other tribes, and they did this in the same way that Europeans did across the world. It's the same type of thing. But I clearly see, and I've pointed this out in the show before, that I do believe that they're now essentially trying to ethnocide white people all across the world. I have friends all across the world in Ireland and England and all their nations that their ancestors built are being subverted. And all of these things that the schools are teaching do really reflect what was going on in Russia and in the Weimar Republic. The first transgender clinic was in Weimar, Germany. So there's a lot of things reflecting on the way that history was and what they're trying to push now. And I think they're trying to make it like the Weimar Republic, where there is no rules and it's all degeneracy, and they're trying to shame and guilt specifically white people. And we're less than 7% of the worldwide population. And I think that people that came here that want to assimilate, I actually have a lot of Asians that support my messages when I've done videos. I've went viral about some of this stuff. And people that came to Canada, whatever skin color they may be, and adapted and assimilated and loved Canada for what it was. But Canada at its core is essentially white Europeans. They're the ones that built it, yes, with help of small fractions of other ethnic groups. But realistically, without white Europeans, there is no Canada. No one would be coming here. There wouldn't be unified nations. There wouldn't be infrastructure and schools. And from as far as I've looked into, the residential schools were not like death camps. There were government-funded institutions ran by churches aimed at giving Indigenous children literacy, trade, and language skills to integrate into the growing economy. And I'm sure there was abuse and stuff like that. And it's interesting because I wanted to point to the fact that there was also abuses like in other institutions and orphanages and it happened in schools. Like, it's just something that happened. And to shed light on just this, that this is what was is not necessarily true and factual, right? Like, I've seen reports that I saw like some quotes. I can't remember what the guy's name was, but he said it was like the best times of his life when he was a kid.
Yeah, no, well, but it's all wrong. It's just so you look at these pictures of kids and then you get somebody who makes up a big whopper like the woman who began the Orange Shirt Day, and her name's Phyllis Ann Webstad. And what's interesting about her is she said that her shirt was stolen, her new orange shirt that her grandmother bought to her. She doesn't say that her parents abandoned her. She doesn't say that her uncles sexually and physically assaulted her. She doesn't say about how horrible it was on her reserve. So she comes paid for by Canadian society for 1 year to a city, a very small city, a large town called Williams Lake in central British Columbia. And she goes to a local public school, but she stays in a hostel, in a residence that used to be a residential school. So she never went to residential school. And you got all these people all across Canada, wearing their orange, showing people that they're part of the hate those who aren't wearing orange shirts, hate people like me who are daring to say that these people aren't history's angels. And so she says, the nuns, did terrible things to me. They took my shirt and they cut my hair. And they're telling this in daycare to my 3-year-old grandson. And you go, oh, hold on a second. We don't know, because we've only got it from her, that she even had an orange shirt. We don't know that it was taken away permanently. Maybe she did have one and it was washed and given back to her. Maybe it was full of life. Maybe it was full of holes. We don't know anything. And you can't say history is based on what one woman who's now probably a multi-millionaire has said about it. There were no nuns there. There were no nuns in all possibility, because she went to a school again, that was public, and where she was staying used to be a residential school, but it had been taken over by the government 4 years earlier. So there's no need for nuns to have been there. Nuns wouldn't have been in charge. It was the government. So that part of the story is false. Cutting hair, she doesn't say, well, kids had lice. If you look at these girls in the picture, they're not bald. They've got hair. What are they talking about? They kept hair shorter on girls than maybe some girls might have wanted, but it's still a nice length. And the reason that they would have done that at first is, simply for lice. So it's just such a fascinating thing. You talk about white people being, under 8% of the world's population, or maybe less than that. I think you might even say
I think we're facing a genocide ourselves, but a quiet one that they don't want to acknowledge.
No. But it's very clear that, nothing stays the same anyway. And this is, the play of what we see from history, that, that there's all sorts of things that, happen to all of us. And we're all evolving, and who knows what any of us is going to look like 100,000 years from now. But one thing is really clear, that white people, white European, though a very small minority of the world's population, should not be demonized in a classroom for all sorts of reasons. You don't demonize kids. You don't demonize kids in particular for things that they didn't do.
Yeah, we had nothing to do with, my ancestors didn't have anything to do with what the empires were doing.
And you don't call them names like settler and stuff. So I'm part Viking, Tom, and the Vikings have been coming to Canada for over 1,000 years. And then you have the Iroquois that come over after the American War of Independence, and in the late 1770s, 1780s, and then again after the War of 1812. Like they're much more recent than my people. And then you had the Sioux that came over after the Battle of Little Bighorn in 1776 and 77, that winter under Sitting Bull. These are the First Nations apparently, but they're here so far after people, and you don't even know of these Beringian migrants, if these Siberian migrants that we call indigenous people today, because they had to come from somewhere.
They're from Southeast Asia. Did you know that they found European carving tools that predate those tribes in North America?
That's right, and that's a theory called the Solutrean hypothesis, and there's many that suggest that we just don't know well enough what happened 10,000 years ago or 13,000 years ago, and possibly some people are saying, I mean, it might be a bit dubious, but it could be as much as 30 to 35,000 years ago that there were humans here. We have no idea. All we know is the early humans, and they have different names for them. But if the whatever you want to call the first people that came over here, they're not the people that were there, who were here, 1,000 years later, because there were just successive waves of people. That's what humans do. We're nomadic. We go where there's food. We go where we can survive, or where there's things that we can take. And that's human history. So we really don't know.
Yeah, and the natives were doing that too, though. Like a lot of 80% of the tribes were nomadically just going across the land, and they would actually burn down massive parts of the forest to get animals out and stuff. They would do things that it is very weird, because there's people in America that point this out. There's some pretty good documentaries on YouTube that are trying to expose this stuff of this idea that they were the Pocahontas story where she's talking to birds and they named everything in the wilderness. That's not what was going on. There is tribes that were taking other tribes' children and then slaughtering them. There's a lot of negative history. Every people on Earth have been involved in warfare and death and disease. And it's funny that they try to ignore all those other people, but then focus strictly on white people. When I always point to this, where a lot of black people bring up slavery and stuff, right? But the word slave comes from Slavic, when white people were enslaved by the Ottoman Empire. Yet we don't get reparations for things that happened hundreds of years ago. And it's just very weird how they try to paint essentially white people as only the villain. And I see this, you have a lot of people from India coming here now that I believe are importing their culture and it's eroding ours. And then they like to scream this whole thing about stolen land as if it's justification for them coming in here. And they use this all the time, right? And it's they're doing it in, the British Empire did this to us, so we're going to invade Britain through their government's failed policies. Meanwhile, they forget to mention that the British Empire helped build half of India. So it's without some of this history, yes, it was bloody, they would not have half of the comforts that they do.
Well, but that's an interesting thing. You just comforts right now. So with these residential schools, the idea was to give them the skills to be able to make it, whether it's English language. Oh, by the way, it's I've been looking for years. I've never seen a really sad looking kid in a photo at a residential school. So anyhow, all the comforts. And then you get academics. People are getting paid a lot of money to teach young people in university, saying the dumbest things imaginable, like we need to decolonize. Well, tell me what decolonize meant, and a lot of indigenous groups, if there was no food, there's stories of cannibalism.
Yeah.
Cannibalism of the young, cannibalism, particularly the orphaned, cannibalism of people from other tribes. Taken in war, cannibalism of older people, or certainly the extermination of older people because they're competing for the same food. It was pretty awful not to have the conveniences that we have today. And this idea that we go back in time and that's where you're going to find it. No. And maybe I did a post.
Well, what if we took all the infrastructure? We just take everything. That's why I've done videos about this. I've went viral talking about Canadian history, and I said, like, if this is stolen land, you want your land back, then we'll take all of the infrastructure and the trillion. It's at this point, it's like $2 trillion that has been handed over into Indigenous communities. And I was gonna say this earlier. It's funny because you see, like, they even 2024 they gave them $30.5 billion. So if you look at the living standard on the reserves, which I kind of call ethno-states, because they are ethno-states within Canada where you only can be native to live there, and you get no taxes, free education. But if you look at the living standard, it stays the exact same, while the spike of how much money they've been given, and I like to bring this point up all the time, the chiefs are stealing the money the exact same way that politicians are stealing from us. And there's people like near like the Six Nations Reserve in Brantford, and Kenny Hill, he's now dead. He took a lot of money and built a lot of big houses and didn't really hand it to his people.
No, when, the figures even are that they bandy about are, the feds give approximately 32 to 33 billion a year, but that's only through 2 of their departments. They're giving all sorts of advantages to Indigenous
subsidies
people, and such as not paying taxes, such as free healthcare and university tuition and so forth. And then you got the provincial municipal governments. I think a fair number would be 40 billion a year go toward one small race in Canada, and some years more because of, they went to day school in Canada. We have to give them all sorts of money for that. Imagine that, having to go to day school.
But it's not contributing to our society in any way. And a lot of, like, it's not to demonize any of the people, because I grew up with Native friends and stuff like that, but a lot of them were on drugs. A lot of them were plagued by this thing of, like, cultural guilt almost. And I knew of people that, maybe they got hit by a Native drunk driving. He gets like 2 years and let go because he's the victim somehow, right? So you see this. And even I had, there's a guy named Adrian the Realist, that's what he goes by, but he's a Native fellow who brings up this stuff and actually talks about the abuse that happens on the reserves and how they don't want to talk about it, how they're trying to, like, pretend it's not happening. And then they live, like, in this, like, victim mentality, this victimhood their entire lives, and think they should be given everything, but then you're not contributing to, like, the nation, you're just there sitting on wealth from victimhood, essentially.
Yeah, and you know what? And ordinary people go, "Oh, well, it doesn't really affect me." Well, one day Canada, I never imagined that we'd have a government that's getting ready to table a deficit in 1 year of $100 billion. And that is, that's what the rumor is, is being overspent by the current Liberals. So if people think that we can continue to be a welfare system from cradle to grave for every Indigenous person and give whatever it is, $40,000 to $45,000 a year, including ones that already have millions of dollars because they, like bands in Vancouver, where they're sitting on incredible real estate and everyone's going, give it back to them so they can live as they did in the past. What they're doing, the band that's, one band that's close to where I live is called the Twasin, and they were given a lot of farmland about 20 years ago, and they've just completely paved it over. And they're just taking in tons of money from Walmart and Amazon and all sorts of huge companies that have moved operations onto reserve land because they get a better deal there. And again, the Native people aren't paying taxes, so they're just raking it in. And we're supposed to tell again school kids, because that's who I am. I have the perspective of being a teacher, and when you're a teacher, what you want to do with kids. If math tells you that 2 + 2 is 4, if chemistry tells you, or maybe better, physics tells you that if you drop an apple, it's going to go down and bump, hit somebody in the head. It's not going to go up in the air. These are evident truths. That's the same as in history. If you're talking about anything, you want to work with facts. You want to work with things that are going to help the kids go forward. You don't want to tell kids a cow's a horse and a horse is a cow and have them stumble through life looking like idiots. So why would you go telling people that the way to live isn't Western Christian, modern, capitalistic, with Enlightenment values, with constitutions and case law and all the things that represent Canada. No, let's wipe it away and let's go back and have a tribal council as they used to do, and then sit and watch, somebody taken from enemy tribe being, eviscerated, and eaten. Like, it's just the most incredible thing that you can find a better world by going back in time. You might find things in the past that we can learn from, which is why history is, in many ways, a clean discipline. But what we can't do is lie to Indigenous people that their problems with fetal alcoholism, with suicide, with drugs, like the drug that killed my nephew. You can't. You're not helping anybody by saying you have all these problems, but it's all our fault. Don't do anything. Just turn the TV on and get yourself a drink and don't worry about it. We're the problem here, and we're going to just give you more and more money. Go and give you more trucks and whatever, drive around, and we're going to do all this for you. But it's not going to help them. It's not going to help them, because if there are children in those homes that are being abused at 10 times the national rate, then you need to, if you have any decency as a human being, you need to help those kids in those reserves. You don't help them by turning their head to the past and say, oh, look at the past. Look, you had more land. The reality is, how do you know they had any land in the past? How do you know any of this stuff? Like, it's just so absurd what they're doing.
They didn't have borders. They didn't have settlements. Like, most of the Indigenous were just walking across the land. They didn't even have horses until Spaniards show up. So, like, even with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, they held it as, like, gospel, but even the testimonies, these recorded allegations, often decades old. They didn't have no corroboration, and they try to put these through courts. But, like, there's thousands of testimonies, though, from Indigenous alumni who gained skills, learn trades, and look back on their education actually positively, but their voices are often silenced. And we see this too. And it is like, and this is, I don't know, when I started studying communism, when I was like, wow, this is exactly what they're trying to do to Canada. And instead of everyone focusing their attention on the thieves in Ottawa, where, there's drug epidemics everywhere, children are dying, they're not classifying fentanyl as a chemical weapon, so then the military could step in and get rid of all of these drug dens and stuff like that. They're like, oh, well, we need to build more housing for homeless people or like immigrants, right? We're housing all these people in hotels and stuff. Our tax money's paying for it. It's not the government's money. And then our people are on the streets dying. And I've seen a lot of foreign people make fun of the fact that white people are dying and on drugs. And it's because our system has kicked all of us down and demonized us. And people are, they don't even know their identity. If you don't know who you are, it's pretty easy to destroy you. And they just want to throw more money at it that we can't afford, but they're not going after the problem. Like, the biggest drug bust of, it was owned by the Chinese and controlled by Punjabis, and there's no justice and nothing's done, and yet more and more people die. And it's interesting because when we see this with the, residential schools, and well, especially like on the reserves now, it's just like I live close to one. I've driven through there. It's not as much money as they just throw on them. It doesn't look great. They're not building anything. And I do believe, because it's some of this victim mentality of like, this is all white people's fault. And a lot of, I find that the native population, like the Indigenous and these different tribes, like they don't even identify with Canada, but when we bring up this thing of like, oh, there's too many immigrants, Canada should incentivize their own people to have children, but yet we're throwing billions of dollars at bringing foreign workers here and giving them subsidy wages, no money for actual Canadians, no incentivization for us to have kids. But then these people repeat these lines of stolen land, this is native land, but there was different tribes. Canada didn't exist. A Canadian did not exist until white Europeans built this nation, right? And then you have like all of these groups, they identify with, oh, they were part of the Huron tribe, or that's mostly how they identify, and they were mostly nomadic. But if you see their standard of living, it's not as if they're building anything or creating anything. It just very much seems like they're living in this victimhood mentality. And I personally know someone, his girlfriend had kids with a native guy, and his kids were given $30,000 each or something ridiculous. Like, and he's like, I saw it. Like, it's so just because of their native, they were given like all of thousands of dollars just for essentially existing in a time that's peddling like this guilt trip agenda while the government keeps stealing everything, and nobody's like, there's like, give us more of your stolen money from the actual people who work hard, right?
Yeah, and with the coming back to the mass graves things here. So this is the game. So I myself, I don't believe that we have to even look outside of our country. Obviously, a lot of these, stupid ideas are coming to us from places like the United Nations. But I'm not blaming anybody of people in Canada. We're electing people who are not helping anybody. And I'll say two things. One is that they're not helping Indigenous people. So right now they're on this idea they're missing and murdered and disappeared children that can be. Murray Sinclair gets an Order of Canada for saying it could be as many as 25,000. And of course, there's not a single missing kid. Nobody took better records than the Christians who ran these schools. But then on the other hand, you can be Indigenous and say, oh, my people lived here for 10,000 years. Oh, okay, here, have all this land. And so people are being rewarded for, as one comedian said, for keeping bad records. So just with the Indigenous people, they're saying to them, they're saying, oh, that's terrible how you were treated. And look, there must be, because it was one, white woman who said, oh, there are 215 children buried here in Kamloops. It was a white woman named Sarah Beaulieu, and who's teaches as she's a professor at a university. And everybody sort of follows along and goes, yes. But the fascinating thing about it is they get lots of money. They're not digging, but they use the money for healing center and some other things, but largely for a healing center and from counselors. So what they're doing is the big industry in Canada, and it's not just Indigenous people, it's for lawyers. Oh my gosh, how many law firms have a hand in this? How many others, do business with these, all of a sudden suddenly stinking rich bands, because that's the case in many places. And so there's a lot of people in this reconciliation industry. And what they're doing with the Native people is they're saying, oh, you suffered so much trauma. It was so terrible. And every once in a while, there's an Indigenous person who's honest and go, oh, actually, I remember back in time, my great-grandmother saying, we were starving and we never knew how we'd live to the end of the day because of wild animals or some enemy, might be sneaking up at nighttime. So, but we're told that, oh, no, everything bad was because of somebody else. So what we need to do is we need to acknowledge that trauma forever and ever. And then we need to have healing centers. And then we need to, of course, find more graves or more this or that was done wrong. Oh, my gosh, the 60s scoop. They're white people that adopted neglected Native kids. Can you think of anything worse, Tom, than actually helping kids who didn't have parents that were providing the necessities of life? What terrible white European people. So they keep on finding all these reasons to traumatize the Indigenous people. And then they say, here, build more healing centers, because that's your role. Have trauma, heal, have trauma, heal. And you're going to be spinning forever. Like you're not going to solve any of the problems in your community.
No.
You're going to be just as far behind by doing that. And then, of course, the people in this industry who are non-Indigenous are, because everybody else is being such a useful idiot, they're making good money from it. And the second thing I'd like to say is about white people. If you seeing the pictures there, if you're white people in Canada or non-Indigenous generally, and you think it's a good idea to give race-based preferences, then I would like to meet you someday and try to understand how you think it's a good idea to build a society where you don't treat people equally. And you do it on the basis of imagined ancestry, because in many cases, we're not going to ask what we'll just assume, we'll just take, if you tell us you're Indigenous. So now you're getting people who are, from India, get status cards and the one, Indian family from India whose daughters got so much money to go to university because they just played being Inuit. And so it's just, you start doing that, everybody's going to be marrying or finding a way to lie about being Indigenous to be part of their spoils. It's just going to become the biggest scam one could ever imagine. The best thing to do is just go, stop. Say to all the activist judges, say to all the virtue signaling politicians, say to all these, goody two-shoes who aren't goody two, but they present themselves that way in schools and so on, in universities, say to them, enough. A Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian. Don't demonize any group. Everybody should have equal rights and equal opportunity in school. And if some groups end up doing better than others, then maybe the other groups have to model themselves after those groups. But don't play with this game like the Russians did. They went, oh, you've got rich farmers. They might have been Jewish. They might have been called kulaks. They might have been German, whatever, whoever they were. And they say, oh, these people are bad. We'll kick them out or we'll kill them or whatever. And we'll give all the land to the poor farmers. And then all of a sudden, you don't have much food. And this is what we're doing in Canada. You're taking wealth from the people who produce it, and you're giving it to the people who produce the least.
That's communism. It's about tearing people down so everyone is equally poor. And one thing like that I like to point, I don't like I like just the sentiments on like I don't think that people can show up here and just become Canadian. That's something that like is kind of been used against us, that like a piece of paper can connect you to the land and the heritage of this land. And if we don't know who we are, if anyone from anywhere can be anything, as Pierre Poilievre said, then it's not like it means nothing. Then I can't go to China and become Chinese. Like that's something that I push back against a lot, because like the Canadian people, the identity of Canadian people are white people. Yes, there's other groups that assimilated and came in, but they're not Canadian. In the same way, like an African American, it's because they're not American, they're African American, right? And that's what a lot of people, and this is being used against us. There's a lot of people that are being like, well, I'm a Canadian because I have a passport. You guys are on stolen land. You guys aren't even the real Canadians. And I've brought this up on videos that went viral and stuff of like, there wasn't a Canadian. There was no such thing as a Canadian. And I'm actually like, I was going to do a video recently, but like if you just Google stereotypical Canadian, you'll see a white guy in plaid, right? And it's because like stereotypes do matter. Stereotypes in some regard are negative, but there's other ones that are essentially, it's just pattern recognition. That's the same idea with like how people get labels as racist. The word racist got coined by Leon Trotsky. He like at least popularized it during the Bolshevik Revolution, and to essentially attack white people, to browbeat people that are against the communist agenda, right? But realistically, the idea of racism and racist is pattern recognition. Not everyone, but the majority of these groups of people act like this, and it's clear. Like we see that multiculturalism, when it came to Canada as being a multicultural European melting pot, is one thing, because we all share somewhat of the same ancestry, at least the same way of life, right? A lot of them came from Christian nations. You had the French, English, Irish, and Scottish who developed this nation, especially the English and French, and then other like the Hungarians and Polish people and Italians came here and helped build Toronto. But all those people kind of molded into one, and it was a positive multiculturalism, and it was multiculturalism of white people and natives, right? Canada was 97% white until like literally the 70s. But when you bring in other people into this so-called melting pot that was coined by Israel Zangwill, you actually erodes it, because now we have enclaves of ethnic groups like Brampton, which I'm a couple hours away from. It's just like and they've taken over cities, building their own statues. And part of this, I don't understand, where people are like, this is native land. Let's tear down statues of Sir John A. Macdonald, but we're going to build a giant monkey statue for Hindus. We're going to build a Shiva statue on this supposed to be native land. It just doesn't make sense. And this idea of multiculturalism and a Canadian can be anyone, I think has kind of destroyed Canadian culture.
Yeah, but it's very much a ship that sailed, whether it was whatever one's argument is. If I go into, I live in the greater Vancouver area. As a teacher, I had many classes in the last couple of decades where there wasn't a single white European child.
Does that not concern you though?
Well, to be honest with you,
do you think Canadians should be like strangers in the homelands that their ancestors?
Yeah, but I don't know. All I can say is that I don't see I don't see that. I see something else. What I see is values. I see that the things that I like in Canada don't have a color to them. I like Mexican food. I like playing. I used to like playing pickup basketball and soccer with kids from the Punjab. I used to like having arguments or discussions with girls from Iran. Very positive discussions, I should say. And I mean, I find there's richness from all over the world. So,
but that's not what Canada was built on, though. Canada only became like that in the last 20 years, essentially.
Sure, but what I want to represent. This is me as it was a teacher. What I want to represent is this: is that in schools you have white kids, light-skinned kids of power. Sitting in a classroom today in 2025 who are made to feel badly, some places on a regular basis because of something they can't control.
Yeah, I agree. That's reverse racism.
And so that's what I'm representing. I'm not. I mean, I didn't come onto your show to. I can't unravel history.
Yeah.
History is here. Canada is multicultural. The vast, most classes, particularly in the big cities, are, small minority white and some not at all. So whether that's good or bad is indifferent to me. What I am charged to do as a teacher, Tom, is to make sure there's no kid discriminated against on the basis of something he or she can't do anything about. That's the argument that attracts me.
I agree. I grew up with I had black friends, Native friends, Asian friends. But the thing that I have noticed, right, and that's why I kind of bring this up, is Canadians have lost their identity. A lot of people don't even can't define what a Canadian is. And I believe it comes from the French, English, Irish, and Scottish. Those people blended together. We developed new accents. We had our own culture. And I do think that, if in 50 years, that white people in Canada, especially those descendant of settlers, become the minority, it's not Canada anymore. If we import all of India and Africa and everywhere else, Asia, all these countries, it's not going to be Canada. It is essentially going to be the whole New World Order globalist idea that they've always wanted to do, is blend everybody into the one thing. And yes, when it was slow and people integrated was one thing because they adapted to Canadian values and what our culture was. Now there's people showing up here that claim we don't even have culture. White people don't have culture, even though they live inside of our culture every day.
But I blame white people for that, because the people that fired me were white people.
Yeah, they're cultural Marxists.
And the people are still fighting me to keep me out of the system are white people.
Yeah, they're white liberals.
They're white people who are self-flagellating and saying how bad other white people are and were. And so, no, I'm not. I don't think decency or virtue comes with skin color. I think what is good about Canada, and I lived in different parts of the world, and so I can say with some authority that Canada, relative to other places, is a great place to live. But we're making a mistake. I'm with you, man. We're making a mistake when you have mass immigration and you have people coming in at a time when you've got all these lunatic, woke liberals, leftists. I don't know what, people with suicidal empathy.
Yes.
For people who are going to completely take more. The best example for me is bringing in piles of Muslims, like as though that's going to work out well. Not because Muslims can't be good people, but because they're upholding values that are just so inconsistent with a modern democracy. If you believe in Muhammad and you believe that in jihad and you have a right to take women who are not Muslim and use them as sex slaves, if you believe that kind of stuff, there's no place for you, in my view, in Canada. So I get what you're saying. You should only bring into Canada people who can adapt to the values.
Yeah, integrate.
The values that we have that make Canada great. But in my own family, Tom, I can't say that, man. And even if I believed it, I don't believe it, because in my own family, there are, and I mean, a bigger family, and we have a big family picnic. My mom's side of the family, there's a huge picnic, and it's called the Grant family. Anyhow, that's so there are Jews and there are Muslims and there's Sikhs and there are Hindus and they're Jamaicans and they're
my aunt just died. She was Jamaican.
They were missionary families, so they were, and my mom's side of the family, both her mom and her father went through Trinidad. It's a fascinating story, and they're missionaries in Trinidad. So obviously they were marrying into African families over time. I mean, there's just the whole world is in my family, and so I can't undo that if I wanted to, but I don't know why I would. All I'm asking for, this is my plea, and it's as a teacher and as a person, don't give up on the Canada that we knew because it was better. The Canada we knew did not treat women as second class. The Canada that we knew did not put someone like Tamara Leach in jail, a woman who stood up against a government that was, completely out of control with its COVID restrictions. The Canada that we used to know did not fire teachers like me for telling kids the truth and being honest with kids. The Canada did not try and tell kids they are on the wrong body. And so what is your sexuality? As I said at the beginning, little Tommy, little Sally. So I'm with you. Canada is worth protecting. I don't know how easy it's going to be to protect to keep it 50 years from now. And you can't do it by bringing in 1 million people or 1.5 million people every year, because particularly the politicians are going to they're going to prostate them, but not prostate and prostitute themselves for those votes, right? So you could have 1 million Muslims come in tomorrow, and the politicians of all levels of government are going to be, all the school leaders, everyone's going to be going, because that's where they're going to get their power and their fame
look at
and their
Pierre, man.
From. They're going to go
wearing a turban, that's what the fact that both sides. I would classify myself as an actual conservative, which is conserving your national identity, your heritage, your people, and none of the politicians are doing this. I think they're all controlled by the same people. Mark Carney is wearing a turban. Pierre's wearing a turban. They're speaking in foreign languages. None of that shit should be allowed. You shouldn't be wearing a turban in the RCMP. You should be wearing a helmet on a motorcycle. The idea now is that it's not like people are integrating into Canada. They're forcing us to bow and assimilate to these people's cultures who have subcontinents with literally billions of them, and they shouldn't even be brought into this nation at this point. I believe that there should be an end to immigration for 20 years. They're not going to do that because, in my point of view and the things that I've studied, they're essentially trying to erase white people, especially here in Canada, across the world. They want to get rid of us. There's the UN replacement migration is a very real thing. Pierre Elliott Trudeau signed on to the Immigration Act after they changed the flag from what showed our heritage, the red ensign, which I believe is the true Canadian flag because it shows the founding stock of people that built the nation. The soldiers died under it. And yes, if people came in and they integrated, it was good. And I've had friends of all walks of life. But now, because I see essentially what I remember in the 90s in the country that I remember is essentially gone. And there's a lot of people making the point that we'll never come out of this without violence and without fighting and I'm not saying I'm promoting violence, but I'm saying there's no way to vote out of this because they've imported so many people, we will never win again. Conservatives will never win. Pierre will never win. It's never going to happen. They've imported way too many people.
Yes, but it's not but I don't think, again, any of this is skin color because all of my friend group, my family and my neighbors, the majority of them, without any doubt, voted liberal in the last few elections, voted for Trudeau.
I know white people are the big problem. They've been conditioned and brainwashed.
So this idea that goodness is going to come only from white, I think this is my view.
Yeah.
What we need to do is we need to say, this is a classroom or this is a country. Mm. And if you want it, Tolstoy said, what good is a classroom, or he said a house, you don't know how to live in it. What good is my classroom or my country if you don't know how to live in it? And if people are coming into this country and they're going to get the benefits of being in Canada, then they have to adapt themselves to the things that we have consensually established as right, meaning that boys and girls, meaning that police officers don't wear turbans. Yeah. I agree with you on that one. And that the boys don't sit in front of girls at a mosque or a religious institution. That one of the fundamental values of our country is that we don't discriminate against people on the basis of their sexual organs, or so we don't do that in Canada. We're losing that. That to me is the battle. Tom, I just can't believe for a second we got, again, the majority of white people voting for people like Carney and Trudeau.
That's because of conditioning, decades of propaganda.
Then actually the people that want to save the country, you mentioned it earlier, the people that I meet who want to keep Canada where it's fair, and you're not giving it away to Indigenous people who are going to do what with it? Nothing. They're just going to rent it out. Yeah. And who knows, to the Chinese communists, who knows they're going to rent it out to? And they're not going to do anything to build it. So what I find is where I actually have more success, and I've run in recent elections, federally, provincially, municipally, I actually have more success with people who are of color and believing in Canada. So to me, it's much deeper.
White people have suicidal empathy, but that's conditioning. They've brainwashed white people for literally decades.
But it's not going to change. But Tom, you're not going to change it. It's that ship has sailed, man.
You don't think a national unity is forming? There's a lot of nationalist groups popping up that are willing to die for this country.
But I don't want to be part of a group that doesn't represent my values, and my values align with my Asian friends and my East Indian friends and my Black friends and including Indigenous friends. My thinking aligns with anybody who believes in the fundamental building blocks of this country. You work hard, you contribute, you be nice to your neighbor.
But do you not agree that they're becoming tribalistic? Like Muslims only stick with Muslims, Indians stick with Indians.
But I don't want white people to be tribalistic.
But we have to be, or we might not survive. We might not survive. We literally might not survive. That's true.
White people being tribalistic, they'll kill me too. Yeah. Because I live that. I know what white tribalism is, because both of us, Tom, are from Ireland, and you don't have to go back even decades before you find white people killing each other.
I agree.
On the basis of some stupid, I'm Catholic and I'm Protestant. So my point is, tribalism is wrong. And that's what the whole thing. So again, on our screen here, we've got mass graves hoax. And you invited me on, and I'm a nobody except for one thing. I've got a following that's growing.
Yeah, I see
people are starting to know about me because I've got something. I got a backbone. I'm going to stand up to anybody who tells me that Indian residential schools were terrible or genocidal. I'm going to say, you don't know what you're talking about. They educated people, and thank goodness. And the people who worked in them should be given medals and not be, thought of as murderers. But what I am is this. I'm believing that you need to get rid of the things that are bringing our country down. You can't put a ton of debt onto future generations, as we're doing. You can't separate people on the basis of race, religion, whatever. You can't say a group of people like the Indigenous should own everybody else, just rents off them. You can't take someone like Tamara Leach, who's part Indigenous. You can't take someone like that and put her in jail when she was standing up. She's the Laura Secorder of her day. She's the young Canadian female, because she's still young in my books, who stood up against all sorts of a mob of evil people to do something good for this country. That's what I want. That's what I want.
Yeah, so, and I'm not meaning to I'm just giving you my thoughts about essentially the way I view things. And the thing is, everybody, tribalism is good and bad, but like my thing is like if white people in Britain say don't become tribalistic, there will be no Britain anymore. It won't exist. And the thing is, if everyone else is allowed to be tribalistic and build in communities within an enclaves in our nations that our ancestors built, then why are we not allowed to do it? They're creating a Punjabi only healthcare facility. But if white people did it, whites only, you can't come in here unless we would be demonized. They would scream from the high heavens. It would be called all sorts of things, and we would probably go to jail for it, for standing up for ourselves. My problem is that white people aren't allowed to stand up for themselves, and that we're told that we need to house everybody else in despite of our own culture. So if my house has 7 people in it, and is it running pretty well? Yeah. And then I let 7 other people from some other place into my home, will my house still function properly? Probably not. So it's like there's indiscrepancies and things that must change, or Canada will be carved out and there'll be like a Indian only place and in blacks only, and it's starting to happen right now. They're trying to charge white people with more crime time.
Tom, I absolutely agree, man. And I think a lot of Canadians are feeling that's there. That we're losing our unity.
They've taken over
We're
cities.
losing our sense of what it's like to be Canadian from coast to coast. Mm-hmm. We're losing our charity. We're losing a sense of who we are. You can't take away a common past. You can't defame the dead in Canada and then bring in and rename streets after
you can't even pronounce
some person in Africa. Like, it makes no sense. I'm with you. And so just an ending here, because I know I see time is
we can go on a little. We can go on a little further if you still want. I would like to.
I'm a little bit short on time, but what I'd love to do is to say this to you: is again pulling it back to me. The whether people like it or not, the kids that I teach in schools, and I'm still doing some stuff with young people. I mean, I'm blocked from schools on this monster because I'm telling kids the truth. And the adults are like all Pied Pipers. They're just leading children away from their parents, and they're going to end up, leading them into really awful places. We're seeing that. And so what I want to do for my students, whatever stripe they are, whatever tribe they are, whatever their identity is, and I don't think you can ever say any one tribe speaks for everybody.
Yeah, I agree.
And I know that. My own family, I can sit at the dinner table with my 3 kids who I've known their whole lives, and we don't agree on much. So my point is, and they're living their lives somewhat differently from each other as well.
Yeah.
My point is, let the Canada that my father knew, and again, a guy who rose pretty high, Order of Canada, brought Patriot of the Constitution. He sat there with Trudeau and others, and with 2 others, Chrétien and Romano, found a solution to get 9 of the 10 provinces to agree to this, the Constitution Act 1982. If he were here, he passed a couple of years ago, but if he were here listening to me, he'd be proud of me.
Yeah.
Because he said, that's it, Jim. The Canada we know is based on individuals. It's based on the tough men and the women like Tom Thompson, group of 7 artists.
That's what my grandfather's name was.
Canoe by himself up in Algonquin Park and sketch and sketch things that made us proud. This incredible virgin land. It's tough to live in, but it's incredibly beautiful.
Our comedy, Bob
and water and clean air, and it's just endless. These people are being demonized now.
Yeah, I know.
What idiocy. And we're going, oh, boys and girls. Well, I see the majority of my classes from India. Therefore, let's learn about Indian history. And I'm going, no, that's not good for Canada. Not that we can't talk about Indian history on occasion or talk about any country in the world, but you need to have things in common. Otherwise, we're going to fall apart as a country. So
they're not teaching even kids about Canada at all. If you ask the average person what a Canadian is, they'll be like a piece of paper. They don't know what it took to build this place, right? They essentially created a country, and it was white Europeans that did it, 100 years to carve out a nation from wilderness that native tribes were fighting over and stuff. if you're low on time, we can kind of bring this to a close. And I just wanted to give my sort of thoughts because I'm very concerned, right, about the future. I have a baby girl. She's only a couple months old, and I don't want her to become a persecuted minority in the country that their ancestors built. Essentially too, because like when I started to find out that my family on my dad's side has been here since the 1700s, and then when I found out one of my grandmas, her bloodlines go back to 1604, and then it stops. I don't know when she came here. She could have came from Canada, whatever. America, what it is now, but we traced her to Canada, 1604, and then before that, she was in what now is America, and it stops. So my family's been here for 421 years, and that's only what I know of. And it's like people are telling me that I'm not Canadian because natives are, even though there was no Canada, right? So I push back against a lot of this stuff because without white people, there is no Canada, though. Like, they have to admit that. And it's interesting because all these people that come here that want to take advantage of the systems that we built, the infrastructure, the subsidy wages, all the benefits that immigrants are getting, my ancestors never got. They carved a nation out of nothing and weren't handed everything just to show up here and replace our population. I think it's a replacement. I think that's what they're doing. There's literally documentation that they're doing this, and that's my concern. I don't want my kid to be persecuted minority.
But I kind of agree with you. Again, I don't see color. I really don't, and I would never have been given opportunities.
But they do.
They do, and that's wrong. I agree that they do. Oh my gosh, that's the woke dream. That's their fetish. That's their wet dream. This idea of going, oh my gosh, we can have all these people of this stripe and people of that stripe, and we'll get rid of people who look like me. Yay! This is what progress. We're after. Look like you, Tom. That's not making a better Canada, but the way I look at it, again, I see it. I'm not representing anybody but myself. Mm-hmm. And I go into a classroom. I want those kids to think that every single one of them matters just as much to me. And,
I agree. You should treat people with respect.
They need to have, for me to be happy with them in my country, I would say to them, that you have to buy into Canada. Mm-hmm. And the Canada that I know does, unlike Trudeau's comment famously years ago, we don't, we're post-national, we don't have, and there's nothing about Canada. We don't have any, common values. We do. And the last little thing, if I could just say that when they had in Afghanistan, there was a women's march. And one thing we do in school a lot, talk about, how bad it was for women back in time in Canada. And the reality is it was harder. My mother couldn't wear long pants because she was a girl, or couldn't wear jeans because, anyhow, so it wasn't that long ago that women didn't have the same rights as men. And so we talk about that and we say, well, that's not right. And then you read in the paper and Canada's losing soldiers in Afghanistan to try and export some of our values. And the women there, after a while, get the idea that, oh boy, maybe we can make changes. And they go and they have the only one in Kabul, the capital city, they go and have a women's march. And the men start picking up rocks and throwing it at the women, and the women disperse. Some of them are hurt. And of course, there's no more women's marches. The Canada that I know would be the men, regardless of religion, regardless of anything, would pick up stones and throw them at the men that were throwing stones at those women. That you asked at the beginning, what's a true Canadian? A true Canadian is someone who is decent, someone who does what is right for other human beings. I'm a Christian. You know what a Christian means to me more than anything else is living well.
Yeah, I agree.
It's living well. It's living in a way that you're looking out for not just yourself, but for your fellow man. And our politicians aren't doing that, Tom. And that.
They're stealing all of our money.
They're doing terrible things. And in the school system, they're separating kids and they're judging kids badly because of skin color or religion. And other kids, they're giving all sorts of things to who aren't deserving simply because they're associated with this group or that group. You and the school system should be operating on the values that have guided us to this time. So that's my last comment. And I just want to thank you again, Tom. It's an honor that social media people like you listen to me, because mainstream media, they don't give a damn that there's a teacher fired for talking about there's no grace in Kamloops or any other reserve. They want to lie to people through their teeth. And so thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Yeah, it's definitely part of an agenda. I think it's definitely to give the UN land grabs and take over, people's property and push us further towards communism, the Holodomor and the Bolshevik Revolution. But tell everyone where to find you. I'll close it out once you're gone. Maybe discuss some of the things I was going to while you were here. But I know you got a time limit, so tell people where they can find you, how they can support you.
Well, thank you. And again, incredibly grateful to Strange Brew to...
We named it after Bob and Doug McKenzie, right? I wanted to keep it Canadian. Right?
Bob and Doug McKenzie, man, did I love those guys.
Yep.
And so I think it would be helpful for me, obviously, but I think for teachers and kids right across Canada, people have supported me. So I have 23,000 followers on X. So name again, you can see it on the screen. And it's just really easy to go on X and find somebody, or just Google my name. You can find it. I also wrote, all sorts of things in recent years, articles and stuff, and a book. If people were to find my book on Amazon, that would be great too. But
spell out your name for the audio listeners and stuff like that too.
So, okay, my name is Jim, as it sounds, and my last name is McMurtry, McMurtry. And my book's called The Scarlet Lesson. But again, people who just were to Google Jim McMurtry, you'll find there's a lot to me about Jim McMurtry teacher. There's a lot out there right now. And because this thing about my story isn't so interesting anymore, that I was the first that said these graves don't exist. There wasn't murder. It's not, I said those. I was first. Mm-hmm. And I was the first punished for that. Mm-hmm. I mean, the first saying it publicly. But that doesn't matter anymore, because there's so many other people smarter than I am, people more, prestigious are saying it. What matters about me now is that teacher, that obscure teacher who did that 4.5 years ago, everyone beat on the head and said, oh, you horrible, horrible person, took away my salary, took away my job, took away absolutely everything, called me all these things. I was a pervert. I was a racist. I was everything imaginable. And you know what? I'm still standing. I'm still standing. And all I can say to all my adversaries is, I'm right. You knew that 4.5 years ago. And I'm going to continue until I'm right in absolutely everything I said. And I want to wait until you start admitting it. And you know what they're doing about the mass graves? These clowns that run the circus called Canada, they're saying, oh, no, we didn't say mass grave. We said, suspected, probable anomalies. You did not. You said mass grave, 250. You said 25,000 disappeared kids, graves across Canada. You said there was genocide. You voted on it. All the parties in Canada unanimously. You're a bunch of liars, political class in Canada.
Yeah.
I'm not a liar. I'm just a nobody teacher, but I'm not a liar. Don't tell me that Canada's past was full of blood and agony toward Indigenous people. We did more for Indigenous people than any country in the world.
That is true.
So enough of the nonsense. Follow me, and you're going to get the truth, as opposed to the crap that you're going to listen to on CBC or read in the Globe and Mail or the Toronto Star. So thank you, man.
Yeah, thank you. You can sign out now, and I'll cover it. Thank you again. Thank you for joining us, man. I appreciate it.
My honor. Thanks, buddy. Thanks.
Yeah, everybody go follow Jim. Go follow his stuff. Pretty interesting conversation. I just wanted to close this out with some of the stuff that I was going to talk about anyway. But at the end of the day, right? They weren't perfect. There was probably abuse in the residential schools, just as there was in orphanages and institutions. But the narrative of Sika killing and genocide simply doesn't hold up to scrutiny. And it's interesting because there is a lot of stuff that people don't want to talk about. They don't want to mention. And I value what Jim was saying. Like, I understand, what Canada used to be like in the 90s and stuff like that. But like, my whole thing is like, if we import everybody else's culture, will it still be Canada? No, it will not. It's not going to happen. And people should, if they come here, should assimilate. And like, bad things did happen in the past in some regard, but like, the nation Canada was formed on the bloodshed of white Europeans and natives who fought together and fought each other. That's a fact. like every other nation on Earth was created in the same way. So while Canada's media obsession over allegations and these alleged crimes in residential schools, they'll never tell you about the very real, very well-documented atrocities committed by some Indigenous groups against settlers and rival tribes. I just wanted to bring this up, the fact that you want to paint us all as villains. Well, you should understand that the frontier reality, you know, of people that risked their life coming across an ocean, you know, to like build something new out of, yes, land that nomadic tribes were traveling on. That's a fact. You know, there was no unified nation. In the 16 and 1700s, French Jesuit missionaries recorded horrific accounts in the Jesuit Relations. These are not myths. These are first-hand written reports. Captured settlers and rival warriors were tied to stakes, burned alive for hours. Their fingers and ears sliced off piece by piece while they were still conscious. This is some of the barbaric acts that natives would do to each other and to the settlers. Hot coals and burning resin were poured into open wounds as torture. Victims were forced to run gauntlets lined with knives and clubs and beaten to the brink of death. And of course, there was, you know, Europeans did this to each other at some point, but to ignore this history is ridiculous, and to ignore this history is to write out lie and paint people as victims and villains. That's what cultural Marxism does, is pit people against each other. Scalping wasn't brought by Europeans. This is actually a lie. A lot of people like to be like, the Europeans were the ones scalping people. Certain tribes scalped their enemies as trophies long before contact. Certain tribes scalped their enemies as trophies long before contact. 18th century colonial records show settlers' scalps taken and hung in villages. During the French and Indian Wars, the entire frontier families were found butchered and scalped. And this is in 1704, Deerfield raid in Massachusetts. People hate how I pronounce that, but alleged native forces stormed the settlements. 48 settlers were killed outright, including children. More than 100 were taken as captives, and many marched through winters, beaten, raped, and killed along the way. It didn't stop there. In Canadian territories, early homesteads were raided, women were violated, men were tortured, and children were killed right in front of their parents. This is what the natives were doing to the white settlers, who were like braved a ocean to come across here and then start developing actual civilization, not nomadically traveling across the land. And settlers' diaries tell of bodies left dismembered, sometimes with flesh removed, ritual cannibalism, records in conflicts between the Iroquois and the Wendat. These are documented in French explorer journals, British colonial reports, and even earlier Canadian newspapers. Yet these accounts are almost never mentioned in modern classrooms. Why? Because it doesn't fit the political script and the endless Indigenous victimhood. So let's, what are we taking away from this? No mass graves were found. Justified, unverified soil anomalies. Most deaths were from disease, not secret murders. Residential schools had negative and positive legacies. Ignored by politicians today, early settlers endured horrific violence from some tribes, history that's been deliberately erased. This is not about denying anyone's suffering. It is about demanding the whole truth. History is complicated, and the narrative you've been fed that Canada was solely built on genocide, while settlers were saints or villains, is a lie. The truth is, Europeans built the framework of the nation we live in today, while facing brutal warfare and unimaginable atrocities, and the residential schools today twisted into a political weapon. Think critically, read the records, and don't swallow the whole headline. So definitely, if you're out there, you know, it's the Strange Brew Podcast, support us, support Jim, give us 5-star rating reviews, comment on the page when you see this, whatever video platform, whether it be Rumble, X, or YouTube, comment, share, all those little things do a lot. You know, you gotta stay curious, you gotta stay skeptical, and don't let them rewrite history, because that's what they're doing, and this is how they dismantle a nation from within. This is part of the agenda. They've done this for a long time. So make sure to support the show. Everything helps. All these little things do help. You getting our name out there, you sharing the episode, all of those things. And I might not agree with Jim on everything, but he makes some valid points. And at the end of the day, right, like the Canada I grew up in was a multiculturalist country, but people embraced what it was to be Canadian. They didn't try to import their cultures other than places like Chinatown, which I don't think should exist. It should be, if you're coming to Canada, you should adapt and assimilate to Canadian values, and we shouldn't be painting people in victims or villains. Hence why I push back against it so hard, because I'm not going to be painted as a villain for something that I had nothing to do with, and neither did my ancestors. And I'm not going to allow any amount of lies or cultural Marxist brainwashing tell me different, or tell my children or the people around me that, we're somehow evil because of our skin color. This has led to a lot of deaths in history when people push this type of propaganda and narrative, which is being constantly done to white people. That's a fact. And now it's being done in Japan, too. It's being done in South Korea. They're coming after the Asians next, it sure seems like it. But, people need to wake up. This was a lie, This was a lie. They lied to you. They lied to you to push an agenda and give money to essentially siphon off money from the taxpayers into nonsense, into fake imaginary crimes. That's what happened. It's fake. They lied to you. No school should be pushing this. No teacher should be wearing those shirts. Imagine the money that's being made from those. This was all used as an agenda. It's quite clear. So support the show, and wake up out of this like victimhood mentality of villains and victims. And this will all be used against all of us, no matter who you are, what skin color you are at the end of the day. So stay stirrings out there, support the show, and we appreciate you for tuning in and listening and watching.